Prosecco. It's one of the most produced wines in Italy, at 660 million bottles made in just 2024 alone. And we can pretty much guarantee that any wine shop you walk into or wine list you browse will almost certainly have a bottle of Prosecco available. This insane popularity and growth can be thanks to a couple of things. Especially, it's a pretty good value to price pick. And plus, it's just pretty darn delicious, as we're going to see later. This ubiquity of Prosecco is what makes it, for us, one of the most important wines that we can learn about. So let's get started. I am your host, Jacqueline, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to have a look at the fundamentals of Prosecco. I'm going to cover it all, like what it is, how it's made, important terms to look for on a Prosecco label, and what to expect in your glass. At the most fundamental basic level, Prosecco is a sparkling wine from Italy. Okay, all done. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like below, and I'm just kidding. So what is Prosecco then? To be called Prosecco, a wine actually must follow a distinct set of criteria laid out in Italian law, known as a denomination. Prosecco can fall under two macro categories: DOC, Denominazione di Origine Controllata, and DOCG, Denominazione di Origine Controllata e Garantita. This latter, DOCG, is a stricter set of conditions. Therefore, it is often viewed as higher quality. These laws, or disciplinare in Italian, will lay out a lot of guidelines for the wines, such as where it can be made geographically, what grapes can be used, and what production methods, and even characteristics of the final product. After a wine is made, before bottling, a producer will have to have a wine approved by the government, who will then give it a cool sticker, like this one here. Blue for a DOC and brown for a DOCG. So why don't we get to know Prosecco through a few of these basic criteria that we'll find in the Disciplinare. As a heads up, today we are going to focus on the most recognizable and famous of the Proseccos, the sparkling white wine. Technically, there are rosé, still, and other types of Proseccos. However, we are going to focus on the most famous one. So first up, where can Prosecco be made? Prosecco can be made in northeastern Italy above Venice, across two different regions, Veneto and Friuli, Venezia, Giulia. But the majority of production will actually happen in Veneto. The production area of Prosecco, as delineated by law, spreads over a vast area that covers both the hills and foothills of the nearby Dolomite Mountains and plains. However, the most prestigious bottles will come from the hillier and steeper areas. We will go over those place names in a minute when we talk about what to look for on a label. But what about the grape? So, fun fact, while nowadays Prosecco refers to the wine made under the denomination laws, once upon a time it was actually the name of the grape itself. This changed in 2009 when Italy decided to rename the grape Glera to avoid confusion with wines that were being made with the grape but did not follow the Prosecco DOC and DOCG guidelines. So this means that when we talk about Prosecco, we are almost always talking about the grape Glera. By law, Prosecco has to contain only 85% of the Glera grape, with the other 15% being made up of other approved grapes. Usually, however, in the best examples, most Proseccos will have 100% Glera grapes, with the exception of the new rosé Proseccos that have been approved as of 2020. All right, so Glera, the grape. Historically, it's an ancient grape that was indigenous to the North Adriatic area. It was supposedly loved by the Romans, from Pliny the Elder to Caesar Augustus's wife, Livia. It's a white grape that's rather anonymous on its own, which is why it's such a great choice for a sparkling wine that kind of zhuzhes it up a little bit. And what happens to Glera to make it into Prosecco? Well, for that, I recommend checking out our video on how to make sparkling wine, where I talked in detail about the method used, known as the tank method, or metodo Charmat, and also metodo Martinotti. Basically, once the base Glera wine is fermented, extra sugar and yeasts are added, and then the mixture will be locked into a big pressurized tank, autoclave in Italian, where the re-fermenting yeast will release carbon dioxide. But seeing as that tank is sealed shut, the CO2 has nowhere to escape, so it will be dissolved into the wine, creating those lovely bubbles. The wine will then be filtered and bottled, always under pressure to maintain that carbonation. This production method will favor wines that are young, fresh, fruity, and floral. We won't see a whole lot of aging or yeast flavors that we would see in a traditional method wine like champagne, for example. Now, I mentioned sugar earlier. So Prosecco, like a lot of sparkling wines, can come in a variety of, let's say, sweetnesses. The sweetness is defined by the amount of residual sugar left in the final wine. This will be represented as grams per liter. The residual sugar in a Prosecco will usually come from the extra sugar that was added in the second fermentation. The wine will be filtered off and the yeasts as well before they're able to consume all of the sugar. These levels of sweetness and their relative sugar levels are Brut Natur, 0 to 3 grams per liter, Extra Brut, 0 to 6 grams per liter, Brut, 0 to 12 grams per liter, Extra Dry, 12 to 17 grams per liter, Dry, 17 to 32 grams per liter, and Demi-Sec, 32 to 50 grams per liter. All right, so a Prosecco will have its appropriate sugar level referenced on the label. So what are some other terms that we're going to see? Well, one of them will be Millesimato, like this wine actually. Normally, Prosecco can be made of a blend of different vintages, meaning it can technically be non-vintage wine at times. However, when you see a bottle labeled Millesimato, this means that the wine and grapes all came from a single year, and that year will normally be listed in conjunction with that Millesimato. In this case, it's a 2023. Other important distinctions we are going to see on labels have to do with the location where the grapes were grown. Remember how earlier I mentioned that the Prosecco growing area will cover both hills and plains, and how the hills were viewed as slightly more prestigious? Well, now we are going to see some indicators that are going to help us place a Prosecco and where it was grown. These are going to be the main ones: Asolo or Colli Asolani, Conegliano, Valdobbiadene. Then we are also going to see the words Cartizze and Rive to help us narrow down on more specific areas within those general areas. All right, it's a lot, I know, so let's go over them one by one. All of these terms are going to be under the DOCG level of appellation, with the Prosecco grown outside of these regions being called just DOCs. So Asolo, or the Colli Asolani, and Conegliano Valdobbiadene are divided by a river, and these areas are named for the villages that they are centered around: Asolo, Conegliano, and Valdobbiadene. These are all found in the Veneto region. They are hilly regions with lots of well-draining limestone soils that Glera likes. If we zoom in further on these areas, we will find the Cartizze and Rive that are used to help denote the certain areas of the larger sections, let's say, of Conegliano and Valdobbiadene. So let's imagine a pyramid structure here. At the bottom, we are going to see the Prosecco DOC, and this can be made anywhere within that denominated Prosecco region. Going up a level, we'll see the DOCGs Asolo and Conegliano Valdobbiadene Superiore, and we are going to then narrow those down into the tip, from where we will find Conegliano Valdobbiadene Superiore Rive and Valdobbiadene Superiore Cartizze, which means that the wines will come from those specific areas of the DOCGs. All right, now we've got the theory down pat, right? But what about the wine itself? What can we expect in our glasses? Well, with a Prosecco, we want fresh, young, and lively. We want aromas of pears and apples, maybe even some lemon lime thrown in there. On the palate, we're going to feel lively bubbles, a fresh acidity, and more of those apple flavors, maybe with a hint of melon too in riper years. I've actually got a Prosecco here to try. It is hold on a minute, a Conegliano Valdobbiadene DOCG Prosecco Superiore Extra Brut from the Rive di Soligo. Let's get it open and try. So we see our nice bubble, lots of very pretty bubbles in the glass. It's a perfect color that I would expect from a Prosecco, which is a very light white wine, so not too golden colored. It's more on like a greenish yellow side almost. The nose is nice and fragrant, and I get those hints of apples, those pears. There's a little bit of a zesty lemon, a zesty lemon smell that comes through too that I really like. So on the palate, those lively bubbles cut through and are absolutely fantastic on the tongue and the roof of my mouth. It's got a great acidity too that really cleans my palate. And I love that feeling, that bright pucker of acidity. This would go great with like a greasier food even, maybe a fried food, because those bubbles will cut through the oil. I really get those apple flavors come through here, maybe a hint of the melon we talked about earlier, but I think the shining star is the apple and the pear in this glass. And this, my friends, is why Prosecco is so popular. It's the combination of the grape, the place, and the methodology that will all mix together and translate into this beautiful, bubbly glass. So thanks for joining me today. If you learned something new or enjoyed the video, please leave a like below. And remember to subscribe to the channel to not miss any more wine education as we continue to pour from our glass to yours. I will see you with the next glass, which might be this one here, on how to make sparkling wine. Cheers!